Fra poco stiamo per cominciare. Bene.
So, liebe Gäste, ladies and gentlemen, the translators, they want to tell you something. Please, could you use your headsets?
Yes, good afternoon. Good afternoon, this is the English booth. The interpreters regret to inform you that a labour dispute is ongoing with EP management concerning their newly imposed working conditions, and this gives rise to a strike notice. Service quality for members and European citizens is therefore at risk. As a result of this labour dispute, we regret to inform you that the interpreting service will stop at 6 o'clock precisely as scheduled. Thank you.
Okay, alles ist klar, wir können also jetzt anfangen. You cannot believe how stressy it is to organize such a conference. Number one. Number two, so first I would like to say to my staff, big thank you, because they did a great, great job. So, now we start. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, friends, welcome to our conference, A Future Beyond World Hunger and Other Crises. And a very warm welcome goes to Philip Wollen, our guest speaker from Australia. Before I hand over the moderation to Dr. Didem Aydormush, I would like to say a few words as an introduction. When it comes to the state of the world, then it is not 5 minutes before 12, but already 5 minutes after 12 or even later. And midday is to be understood as the no-return point from where it is almost impossible to solve the problems and to repair the damage we have done. We are confronted with climate change, air pollution, deforestation of the remaining rainforests and other ecological systems, overfishing and ocean pollution, loss of biodiversity, desertification of farmlands, groundwater contamination, and water shortages, and with the world hunger. World hunger is significantly growing again since 2017. In its latest Global Hunger Index, the United Nations estimates that 815 million people, or 11% of the world's population, are suffering by hunger. 2 billion people suffer from malnutrition, and 25,000 people starve to death every day. And every 10 seconds, a child dies as a result of hunger and malnutrition. But somehow that leaves us cold, ice cold, and the media too. They are reporting about Heidi Klum and how she turned 45, about Sylvester Stallone and his plans for a new Rocky movie, or how the former movie star Brigitte Nielsen is pregnant with 54 years. And meanwhile, what is Brussels doing? It looks like Brussels is not concerned by the hunger problem and most of the crises mentioned. Nothing at all. No one would have to starve to death on this planet if we would stop eating animals. And billions of animals wouldn't lose their lives in slaughterhouses. A much better world could be possible if we only act logical, but we don't, and we will pay a high price sooner or later. Brussels supports big businesses, in particular the agriculture industry, which produces unhealthy and even harmful food, heavily pollutes the environment, reduces the biodiversity, and treats animals as a lifeless unit of production. Brussels changed into a brutal system that does not side with humans, animals, and environment, but generally represents the interests of the big companies. It does more harm than good. And the governments of other countries out of the EU are doing completely the same. Anyway, I have many times the feeling that I'm in the wrong movie. I'm happy that today we came together to openly discuss the problems and to think about solutions. So I'm handing now over to Dr. Didem Aydormush, who will moderate our conference. Thank you very much, and again, welcome to this conference.
Welcome, everyone. We are honored today that Philip Bohlen followed Stefan Eck's invitation and is here. I will keep this introduction short since he's well known, and I want to leave time for him to talk and to discuss. Philip Bohlen was the VP of Citibank and also the general manager at Citicorp. He was a top-notch banker, but then he had an epiphany. Philip Bohlen has since devoted his life to helping others. He became vegan, and now he spends his fortune to fight against human and animal suffering. For him, doing nothing was no longer an option. He is often called a philanthropist, but I don't think that term does justice to the scope of his work. Ecotopian and zootopian might be valid compliments. He conducts intervention programs and rescues abused animals. He funds outreach programs that promote animal welfare and animal product abstinence. Until today, Philip Bohlen has supported over 500 projects in more than 40 countries. He is a particularly strong advocate for the weak, the marginalized, and the voiceless. For his commitment to animal and human rights, he has been given countless awards, among them the Medal of Order of Australia in 2005 and the Australian of the Year award in 2007. This weekend, he will receive the Peter Singer Prize in Berlin, with Peter Singer himself holding the laudatory. Philip Bowen never fails to point out that we are up against a crime of unimaginable proportion, and that it is our duty to defend animals, since we suffer as equals. Hence, I'm looking forward to a wonderful speech and steering discussion. Given the interrelatedness of misguided agricultural politics, our treatment of animals, our diet, and environmental destruction, including climate change, I cannot imagine anybody more suitable to talk at a conference titled A Future Beyond World Hunger and Other Crises. So, with no further delay, let us welcome Philip Bowen, an extraordinary voice for the voiceless.
Ladies and gentlemen, can everybody hear me? I've got a very soft voice. Can you hear me? Oh, great. Stefan, thank you very much for inviting me to Brussels. It's my first visit in 35 years, and thank your staff for the gracious hospitality they've shown me since I arrived a couple of days ago. Now, many conferences ask me to discuss, from time to time, hunger, its causes, and its consequences. But Stefan instructed me to explore a deeper, vaster, and more complex landscape, beyond hunger and other crises, beyond hunger. I concluded that Stefan is a deep thinker, because I remembered when I was a little boy going to Sunday school, St. Matthew's Gospel, man shall not live by bread alone. And then it dawned on me why he chose this topic, because humanity is more than just a species. It's also a civilization. It's an epoch, the Anthropocene, and its interests go beyond food. Like an enchanted spider's web, everything is connected. You touch one strand and the web changes in unpredictable and non-linear ways. Like the butterfly effect and chaos theory, everything is connected. Economics, ethics, theology, science, health, literature, politics, greed, power, climate change, refugees, love, warfare, sustainability, and now the environmental impacts on the atmosphere, water, forests, the oceans, and the very survival of the human species. That is the topic that he's asked me to speak on today. Not much to do in 45 minutes, is it? King Lear, late at night on the cliffs, asks the blind Earl of Gloucester, "How do you see the world?" And the blind man Gloucester replies, "I see it feelingly." And shouldn't we all? Rudyard Kipling, writing of young men dying in World War I, "And if they ask you why we died, tell them that our fathers lied." That legacy of lies continues today. Everything we think we know about the meat and dairy industry is a preposterous lie. You see, today the world is crying out for only two things: leadership and the truth. Today I'm simply going to tell you the truth. The wise Chinese have a term for it: zhengjiao. Listen to the friend who tells you the truth, even when it hurts. So let's just tell the truth, fearlessly and forcefully. That is what the Sanskrit word satyagraha means, the truth force. Now, Brendan Kennelly in the book of Judas wrote, "If you want to serve your age, betray it." But what does that mean, to betray your age? It means expose its lies, humiliate its conceits, debunk its arrogance, and condemn them to face harsher truths. Alvin Toffler reminded us that the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. Now, I have long admired Count Moltke, the great Prussian general. a soldier who preferred to think rather than to speak, a man silent in 7 languages. You see, it takes courage to stand up and speak. It also takes courage to sit down and listen. Now, there was a time when my favorite food was filet mignon and lobster, a fact for which I am so profoundly ashamed today. So what made me decide as a young man to leave the world of lobsters and Learjets in exchange for shelters and slaughterhouses? To take nothing but pictures, own nothing but memories, leave nothing but footprints, kill nothing but time. You see, something happened to me. I had been to Dante's Inferno, but unlike Dante Alighieri, I did not have Beatrice for my love or Virgil for my guide. I heard the screams of my dying father as his body was ravaged by the many cancers that killed him. And I realized I'd heard those screams before. In the slaughterhouse, on the cattle ships to the Middle East, and a dying mother whale as a harpoon explodes in her brain as she calls out to her calf. Their cries were the cries of my father. They were identical. And I discovered that when we suffer as equals. And in their capacity to suffer, a dog is a pig, is a bear, is a boy. So when I look into your faces here today, I recall the words of the Greek poet Horace. Change only the names, and my story is also about you. So in 2 minutes, I should tell you, I decided when I was a young man to take all the money I'd ever made and give it away with warm hands and die broke. And so far, we're right on budget. So in 2 minutes, this is where we work. So please don't avert your eyes. In China, 7,000 magnificent moon bears, their limbs torn off in traps, are imprisoned in steel coffins welded shut as a catheter drains bile into a bucket, which the Chinese drink. For 26 years, the bears can't move, they go insane. In Korea, dogs are beaten to death in the marketplace. The butchers believe that pain and suffering makes the meat tasty. In South Africa, 5,000 orphan lions are drugged and killed with guns, spears, or hunting dogs, and they call it sport. In Canada, 300,000 baby seal pups are clubbed and skinned alive on the ice, their tiny hearts still beating. And in Australia, we killed 90 million kangaroos who adorn our coat of arms, the largest land animal slaughter on the planet. Absolutely disgusting on my own country's part. And we sent millions of animals born on Australian soil on death ships to the Middle East, where their eyes are stabbed out and their tendons are slashed for 30 pieces of silver. Every penny I spent and invested in the Basatine slaughterhouse in Cairo was utterly wasted. The cruelty there is just as bad as ever. In Asia, dogs are suspended on steel hooks and skinned alive to make trim for fur coats sold in the West. And we treat the ocean as our private pantry and as a public toilet. The Pacific Gyre now is so full of plastic, junk, and human feces, it has created a floating footprint bigger than India. And it will treble in the next 10 years. There are 5 bags full of plastic for every foot of coastline in the world. And on Henderson Island, it is impossible to take even one step without stepping on rubbish. By 2050, there will be more plastic in the ocean than fish. I funded the Plastic Cow project in India and showed the Chief Justice of India how cows in the street had up to 50 kilos of plastic, wire, and syringes in their stomachs. And in his ruling, His Honor said, plastic poses a greater threat to India than thermonuclear war. And dolphins and whales are stabbed to death in the shallows of Japan and the Faroe Islands. Huge bays are blood red. Many of you probably know about my involvement with Sea Shepherd. It's a fairly extensive and deep relationship, and it's probably one of my favorite groups, and I'm delighted to see we've got someone here, many people here from Sea Shepherd here in Europe, and I welcome you all. 100 million sharks are torn from the sea, their fins are hacked off, and their bodies are thrown overboard to die agonizing deaths for shark fin soup. And factory farms now spew chemicals into the ocean, creating hypoxic dead zones of 1 million square kilometers, killing coral, plants, and animals. And so-called unviable dairy calves who cannot be sold for veal are killed by farmers by smashing in their skulls or jumping on their rib cages and crushing their hearts. That is the law. And billions of bouncy little baby chicks are ground up alive in mechanical mincers simply because they are male. And we've just come back from inspecting our projects in Southeast Asia, and I can tell you that religious sacrifices of animals makes the 21st century look like the new Dark Ages. And children in poor countries starve because their croplands now produce meat for foreigners. No more pictures, but that's where we work. Now, in human history, only 100 billion human beings ever lived. 7.5 billion people are alive today. And we human beings torture and kill 2 billion sentient, living, loving animals every week. 2 billion a week. We stab and suffocate 1 billion ocean animals every 8 hours. If human beings were killed at the same rate, we would be wiped out in 1 weekend. Trillions of fish are ground up into pellets to feed to livestock. Vegetarian cows are now the world's largest ocean predators. The oceans are dying in our time. By 2048, all our fisheries will be dead, the lungs and the arteries of the earth. You would all know that oceans sequester more CO2 than all the forests of the world put together. 10,000 entire species are wiped out every year because of the actions of one species. And we now face the 6th mass extinction in cosmological history. If any other organism did this, a biologist would call it a virus. It is a crime of unimaginable proportions. Now, many of you would know that there are 2 peak predators on the planet: humans on land and orcas in the ocean. In the 20th century, human beings killed 200 million members of their own species. Orcas killed none. There's no record of ever an orca killing another orca. And don't expect any protection from your own governments either. In the 20th century, 100 million people have been killed by their own governments. Now, Victor Hugo said there is nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come. But I say there is nothing more destructive than a bad idea whose time has passed. The time for meat has passed. Happily, the world is changing. 20 years ago, Twitter was a bird sound. www was a stuck keyboard. Cloud was in the sky. Skype was a typo. 3G was a parking space. Google was a baby's burp. And Al-Qaeda was my plumber. The world is changing, and it's changing fast. In many places, for the better. Now, the most beautiful word ever written in any country at any time in human history came from India, from the Upanishads 3,000 years ago. Ahimsa, non-violence to any living being. It's beautiful not because it describes our nationality, our politics, our religion, our diet, or our lifestyle, but because it describes our character. It says we reject violence in all its forms, in our streets, in our homes, in our thoughts, in our hearts, and at our dining tables. And you see, it's not just about animal rights. It's also about human wrongs. Animal rights is now the greatest social justice issue since the abolition of slavery. And that is a fact. It is a revolutionary event more powerful than the Industrial Revolution, the Reformation, the Hubble telescope, or anything ever conceived by Galileo, Copernicus, Einstein, Darwin, or Freud. Because it protects the most precious of all things, life. The growing vegan movement is on the right side of history. Vegans are creating the new enlightenment, the second Renaissance. Let it begin again here in Europe. Now, we all know the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It came, of course, from the New Testament of Jesus, but it actually goes back further still to the Babylonian Jew, Hillel, 70 years BCE. Actually, it goes back even further than that, to the Analects of Confucius, 500 years BCE. In fact, it was inscribed on the human heart long before the dawn of writing. Now, the great anthropologist Margaret Mead said, "Never doubt that a few committed people can change the world. Indeed, that is the only thing that ever has." And it's true. There are only 13 million Jews in the world, but they play such a vibrant role in international affairs. Look at the number of Nobel Prizes they win every year. Trix and I sat in the stadium during the Olympics full of pride, as Australia won more medals than every country in the world except for the United States and Russia. And Australia's population is less than Florida. Tibet's population is only 3 million. But who hasn't heard of the plight of the Tibetan? But there are over 600 million vegetarians and vegans in the world, 600 million. And that is bigger than the United States, England, France, Germany, Spain, Italy, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Israel, all put together. If they were one nation, they would be bigger than the 27 nations of the European Union. They are bigger than NATO. They are bigger than OPEC. And despite this massive demographic footprint, they are still drowned out by the raucous hunt and shoot and kill and cretins who believe that violence is the answer when it should not even be a question. But unfortunately, we live today in a world of sound bites and tweets. It reminds me of Hannah Arendt's book, Eichmann in Jerusalem, where she coins the term the banality of evil. This is how a deceitful journalist at the Australian of the Year Awards twisted my innocent words. Mr. Wallen, I'm surprised a man of your standing would say on your website that meat is murder, a little old lady with a budgerigar is offending God, livestock production is unethical, there will be no peace until we stop killing animals, industry is unattractive, and animals are like human children. Can't you see how offensive that is to our rural audience? Well, this was my diplomatic counterpunch. Well, you've certainly bludgeoned the English language to death, but if you're going to quote me, please do it honestly. I did say, a robin redbreast in a cage puts all heaven in a rage. But that came from William Blake in Auguries of Innocence. And by the way, it was the Prophet Muhammad who said, a sparrow does not fall from the sky without Allah knowing. And I admit, I did say, the commandment, thou shalt not kill, applies to the murder of any living being. It was inscribed on the human heart long before it was proclaimed from Mount Sinai. As long as there are slaughterhouses, there will be battlefields. But actually, that wasn't really me. That was Leo Tolstoy. And I admit, I did say, the roots of cruelty are not strong, just widespread. But a time will come when inhumanity, protected by custom, will succumb to humanity championed by thought. A man is ethical only when all life is sacred to him. But that was Albert Schweitzer, winner of the Nobel Prize. And I did say, as long as we kill animals, there will never be peace in the world. It's only one step to the concentration camps of Hitler and Stalin. There will be no justice as long as man will stand with a knife and destroy those who are weaker than him. But that was Isaac Singer, winner of the Nobel Prize. And yes, I admit I did have something to say about animals and children. The wolf will lie down with the lamb, the leopard with the young goat, the young lion with the young ones of the herd, and a little child will lead them. But that came from the prophet Isaiah. And no, I didn't say a thing about greed and ambition. That wasn't me. That was Jesus. Blame him. He said, behold the birds of the air and the lilies of the field. King Solomon in all his glory were not arrayed as one of these. And for good measure, he threw in a left hook and an uppercut. Whatever you do to the least of these, my brethren, you did it to me. So as you, as a journalist, suggesting that your rural audience is offended by Nobel Prize winners and the prophets, or should I just go home and burn my books? I seem to recall that was the strategy favored by Pol Pot. Well, the journalist was speechless, and he attacked me for being a radical. Ladies and gentlemen, we need another radical Copernicus and Galileo to remind us that we are not the center of the universe. Animals are not just other species, they are other nations, and we murder them at our own peril. If you want to know where you would have stood on slavery during the Civil War, don't look at where you stand on slavery today. Look at where you stand on animal rights. Now, the great astrophysicist Carl Sagan's picture of Voyager solar spacecraft showed the tiniest microscopic pinhole from space. And he described planet Earth as our beautiful home, our pale blue dot, suspended on a sunbeam. Well, human beings comprise 30% of the mass of land animals. Slaughter animals account for 66%. And wild animals in nature have been decimated down to 4%. 70% of all the birds on the planet today are in cages. We have turned Carl Sagan's pale blue planet Earth into blood-stained planet slaughterhouse. Now, the great historian Barbara Tuchman defined folly, foolishness, as acting against our own best interests. That is foolishness. And Occam's razor, named after the 14th century Jesuit, said this: when you're presented with a number of possible solutions to a problem, the simplest solution is always the best. So let's apply these tests to the meat industry. Forest depletion by the meat industry costs 3 times as much as the global financial crisis. 3 times. Livestock provides about 18% of the calories, but takes up 83% of the farmland. And zoonotic diseases from factory farms now threaten a pandemic to rival the Black Death, which wiped out half of Europe. The World Bank says that one influenza pandemic alone would cost $3 trillion. And the Center for Disease Control in America said that there are 150 zoonotic diseases coming right at us. And meat and dairy is killing us with cancers, osteoporosis, diabetes, hypertension. Harvard University says that 1/3 of all early deaths could be prevented by everyone just giving up meat. And Dr. Kasliwal from India warned in The Lancet that India now accounts for 70% of the world's cardiovascular disease due to their stupid addiction to dairy. More recently, the Sierra Club, which is not known for being animal friendly, grudgingly admitted that the environmental violations by the meat industry adds up to a crime sheet longer than Tolstoy's War and Peace. And Medicare and bad diets have bankrupted the United States. They would need $8 trillion invested in treasury bills just to pay the interest, and they have precisely zero. They could shut down every school, university, Army, Navy, Air Force, FBI, CIA, and they still will not have enough money to fund these bills. So how big is $8 trillion? That's how much the whole of Asia needs over the next 10 years for their electricity, roads, water, telecommunications, high-speed rail across China, ports in Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, India, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka, and the new Silk Road from Central Asia to Europe. That's $8 trillion. And that's the damage the meat and dairy industry does only to American health. It's 4 times as big as India's GDP and double the total reserves of India and China combined. Now, my debate on the Australian Broadcasting Commission, called Get Animals Off the Menu, went viral with millions of viewers and was independently translated into over 20 languages. Oxford University then calculated if everyone followed that decision, that alone would save $30 trillion in health and environmental damage alone. Antibiotics, which is pumped into animals, it is now anticipated it will kill 10 million people per annum by 2050 and will cost the global economy $100 trillion. If you thought 8 trillion was a big number, what do you think about 100 trillion? And that's only from antibiotic resistance. That is 60 times what the whole world spends on aircraft carriers, missiles, bombs, bullets, drones, destroyers, tanks, planes, mines, guns, and spies. 60 times as much. Just for the taste of meat and dairy. The world is going insane. I'm convinced of that. Now, I'm sure most of you would know that water is the new oil. Nations will soon be going to war over it. Underground aquifers that took millions of years to fill are now running dry. As a young Boy Scout, I drilled my first well and struck sweet water at 80 feet. Today, I've just built an orphanage nearby, and we're at 800 feet, and we're sucking mud. And at China, at 3,000 feet, the drill head is still dry. Now, everyone here would be outraged if 10 jumbo jets crashed every day with no survivors. Well, the same number of children die every day from water-related diseases. The mighty Colorado River, the Rio Grande, the Indus, and the Yellow Rivers frequently now no longer reach the sea, sucked dry by the meat and dairy industry, while 4 billion people suffer from water scarcity. So why do I speak to you about water? Because it takes 50,000 liters of water to produce 1 kilo of beef. It takes 1,000 liters of water to produce 1 liter of milk, and a dairyman might make 28 cents a liter for it. What a preposterously stupid industry. 1 billion people today are hungry. 20 million people will die this year from malnutrition. cutting meat by only 10% will feed 100 million people, and going vegan will end malnutrition forever. And food prices are skyrocketing. It used to cost me for Thai rice for my projects in Southeast Asia, $197 a ton to feed the projects there. And it went up to 1,015, a five-fold increase in 5 months. And poor countries sell their their grain to the West for hard currency, whilst their own children starve in their arms. And the West feeds it to livestock. So we can eat a steak? I bet I'm not the only one in the room who sees that as a crime. Every morsel of meat we eat is slapping the tear-stained face of a hungry child. When I look into her eyes, do I remain silent? If everyone ate a Western diet, we would need 2 planet Earths to feed them. We've only got 1, and she is dying. The Earth can produce enough food for everyone's need, but not enough for everyone's greed. And now greenhouse gas emissions from livestock vastly exceeds that of transport, cars, trains, buses, ships, a lot. And methane is 24 times more potent than CO2. If the cattle industry was a nation, it would create more greenhouse gas emissions than every country in the world except for the United States and China. The melting Siberian permafrost is now a ticking time bomb. When it releases its sequestered gas, the game is over. Now, the Himalayan ice fields are now correctly called the third pole because it irrigates half the world's population through the Ganges, Indus, the Brahmaputra, the Yangtze, the Irrawaddy, the Mekong, and the Yellow rivers. And these glaciers are melting really fast. I presented these numbers in a speech to 2,000 wealthy Indian entrepreneurs in New Delhi, including Amartya Sen, who had just won India's Nobel Prize in Economics. And I mentioned to Muhammad Yunus after he won the Nobel Peace Prize that all the good that he had done with Grameen Bank would vanish when Bangladesh drowns. To say nothing, of course, about Manila, Mumbai, Calcutta, Ho Chi Minh City, and Bangkok. Kiribati has already bought 6,000 acres of land in Fiji to resettle its people. The Maldives is trying to buy land in Australia, and people are fleeing from Tuvalu, the Marshall Islands, and Nauru. 5 of the Solomon Islands have already vanished. And we had dinner with Al Gore, and we discussed the same numbers. And a few months ago, I gave a speech in Melbourne with Dr. Peter Doherty, Australia's Nobel Prize winner in medicine. No arguments at all from these 4 great minds, 4 Nobel Prize winners. The only arguments I get are from the meat and dairy lobby. So Upton Sinclair was right. It is impossible to get a man to understand something. Impossible to get him to understand something when his salary depends on him not understanding it. Now, we've spoken to Admiral Denny McGinn, who's the chief of US warfighting requirements, and he said that we have learned that nations will raid and invade long before they starve. Well, we freak out when 1,000 refugees arrive on our shores. Imagine greenhouse gas emissions hitting 500 parts per million, or a 3-degree temperature rise, creating 100 million eco-refugees. This calamity will reshape the geopolitical landscape forever. We are facing the perfect storm. If any other nation had developed weapons that could wreak such havoc on the planet, we would launch a preemptive military strike and bomb it back in the Bronze Age. But we can't, because it is not a rogue state. It's an industry. The good news is we don't have to bomb it. We can just stop buying it. Now, George Bush was wrong. The axis of evil does not run through Iraq, Iran, or North Korea. It runs through our dining tables. Weapons of mass destruction are our knives and forks, and increasingly nowadays, our chopsticks. See, the Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones. This disgusting industry will end because we run out of excuses. That is why I say that veganism is the Swiss Army knife of the future. One instrument solves our ethical, economic, environmental, water, and health problems and ends animal cruelty forever. Veganism rearranges the furniture of your mind. And farmers are the ones with the most to gain. Farming won't end, it would boom. Only the product line would change. Farmers would make so much money they wouldn't even bother counting it. And I'd be the first to applaud them. Governments would love us. New industries would emerge and flourish. Health insurance premiums would plummet. Hospital waiting lists would disappear. Hell, we would be so healthy, we'd have to shoot someone just to start a cemetery. Very recently, the American Medical Association actually called for meat to be banned in every American hospital. And even the World Health Organization now strongly recommends a vegan diet. About 3 months ago, about 40 investors with $2 trillion in assets called on all global food companies to replace animal protein with plant protein. And you'll be very pleased to know that plant-based food industry numbers are growing massively, rapidly. Even at this early stage, the plant food industry contributes $14 billion a year to the US economy. It has created 60,000 new jobs this year. It pays its workers $13,000 a year more than the average American salary. It pays $1.1 billion in tax, produces 10 times fewer greenhouse gas emissions than beef, and it gets no subsidies. No subsidies at all. And veganism gives us the peace dividend. I addressed the World Parliament of Religions. I don't know why they invited me to speak, but there you go. And I said, the peace map is drawn on a menu. Peace is not just the absence of war, it is the presence of justice. So talking about peace while killing animals is like loving literature and burning books. They are mutually exclusive ideas. Justice must be blind to race, color, religion, and to species. If it is not blind, it will be used as a weapon of terror, and there is unimaginable terror in those ghastly gulags we call factory farms, where Lord Acton said, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Seneca, the Roman statesman, wrote of Piso's justice, let justice be done, though the heavens may fall. I really believe we need a new kind of jurisprudence, a new legal system, a foro conscientiae, a court of the conscience. So in my journey through Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, I've learned that a man is measured not by how much money he makes, but by how much of it he's willing to give away, particularly to strangers. And if you want to increase a man's share of happiness, do not aim to increase his possessions, simply decrease his desires. Socrates and Epicurus were right. The unexamined life is not worth living. It's not a life, it's a life sentence. And I've learned that I did not find my character on Wall Street because it lives on the road to Damascus. And my heart resonates to the poet W.H. Auden. If equal affection cannot be, let the more loving one be me. Now, Martin Luther King said, Cowardice asks the question, is it safe? Expediency asks the question, is it polite? Vanity asks the question, is it popular? But conscience asks the question, is it right? Is the killing of animals right? Now, I speak to audiences all around the world when I go and inspect all of the projects, and they're all good, caring, loving people who genuinely want to change the world, as long as they don't have to change themselves. But life does not work that way. First we change in our hearts, and then the world follows. True leaders must confront their own demons courageously. Martin Niemöller, the German priest, philosopher, and U-boat captain, spent 8 years in prison for condemning German intellectuals for being cowards. And he wrote, "When the Nazis came for the communists, I remained silent. I was not a communist. When they locked up the Democrats, I remained silent. I was not a Democrat. When they came for the trade unionists, I did not speak out. I was not a trade unionist. When they came for the Jews, I remained silent. I was not a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out." Men and women of integrity must speak out and act courageously. Is it not better to light a candle than to curse the darkness? All the darkness in the world cannot put out the light of a single candle. You see, I believe another day is dawning. And if I close my eyes, I can feel her heartbeat. I know what I'm asking you to do will not be easy. It's going to be very difficult. But whatever happens, do not be afraid. Remember Mahatma Gandhi's words. First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win. The last sentence of Scott Fitzgerald's book, The Great Gatsby, reads, "So we beat on, boats against the tide, drawn back ceaselessly into the past." I ask you, are we to live forever in a sick, smug, and cruel past? Let's not relive history. Let's make history, because that is what leaders do. They make history. That is what they do in this building. They make history. Judge White's closing words in the book Bonfire of the Vanities were, "The law is humanity's attempt at decency." So I ask you all to join us in a battle, in a war that decency cannot afford to lose. Because in the end, only three things matter: how deeply you loved, how gently you lived, and how gracefully you let go of things that were not meant for you. Meat was not meant for you. Our animal cousins have survived millions of years of evolution. They've earned the right to share this planet with us in peace, and they have waited long enough. The brutes and the bullies have been Goliath, but David is coming. Maybe he's in this room. Maybe he's one of you. And if not you, who? And if not now, when? Thank you very much for being here. I understand there may be a Q&A after this. but I've decided to change the rules. For Q&A, I'll ask the questions and you can answer them. Annelies?
I think that would be totally fine if you do this. I think Stefan Eck would be okay with this. You can ask questions to the audience as well. So thank you for this amazing speech. Before we proceed to the hosts and co-hosts' contributions, I would like to welcome the other MEPs in the room. First, Mr. Flack, welcome. And then I want to especially thank Mr. George Bach, who is also a co-host. George Bach is a member of the Christian Social People's Party in Luxembourg, and he is in the House belonging to the EPP. He fights for strong unions and sustainable transportation. George Bach at the same time promotes liberalization. For instance, he spoke in the plenary in favor of the abolishment of milk quotas and in favor of young farmers to extend their milk production. We are thankful that George Bach joins us today. Unfortunately, he has commitments in Luxembourg, so he will have to leave us soon. But let's welcome him. So next, it's going to be our host, Stefan Bernhard Eck. Stefan Bernhard Eck has been actively fighting for animal welfare and animal rights since 1997, but he's also an avid advocate for the environment and human rights. 2014, he was elected into the European Parliament and joined the European United Left, Nordic Green Left. Stefan Eck does not hesitate to break taboos and confront those in power demanding radical change. He regularly highlights our moral duty to protect our planet and all living beings. Last year, Stefan Eck received the EU for Animals Award and was titled Parliamentarian of the Year 2017 by the World Alliance for Mercury-Free Dentistry for his ambitious Mercury plan. By the way, he has been vegan for almost 20 years. For almost 20 years. Now I would like to give the floor to Stefan Eck.
Yeah, thank you. Dear Phil, first of all, thank you for your great presentation, your great speech, which deeply have touched my heart. Although I know all these facts for 2 decades or more already. At that time, 20 years ago, the negative effects of our agriculture system and our diet on so many areas of nature, but also on many areas of our society, were not fully acknowledged, but there were clear signals, clear signs that we were doing something wrong. If I pointed out all these facts 20 years ago, you've been called a sentimental idiot or something else. 20 years ago, I spent some days in the Bavarian mountains, and I tried to explain a waitress of a very small restaurant on the top of the mountain that I'm a vegan and ask if they had something vegan to eat for me. The waitress asked me, when I said I'm a vegan, where you come from? 20 years ago. This luckily improved, but unfortunately, most people still do not have the will to speak logically and seriously about nutrition. I can agree with all the points Phil said in his speech. It's so immoral how we treat animals for our purposes and use them as food and thereby cause many negative effects, but also great moral guilt. Apart from the ethical aspects, our traditional agriculture and our diet destroy the environment. We are thus partially responsible for the decline in biodiversity the contamination of ground and surface water, the rapid spread of multi-resistant bacteria, destruction of the rainforests, the global warming, the overfishing of the oceans, and much, much more. And we are responsible for the hunger crisis. Unfortunately, unreasonable people still have the power on this planet. They sit in the governments and in the parliaments, here in Brussels, in Washington, in Beijing, Moscow, Quebec, Canberra, and elsewhere. Ignorance can be found everywhere where political power concentrates and where the big money and big businesses comes together into contact with politics. Unfortunately, ignorance is rampant when it comes to issues that require the removal of old habits and traditions, or whose implementation could have negative effects on parts of the economy. And besides, no politician wants to scare his voters away by banning their steaks on their plates. Politicians want to be re-elected. Of course, it would be the best thing what could happen to humanity, to the animals, to this planet, if we were all vegan or at least vegetarian for the beginning. We would be able to overcome most crises or at least minimize them. But politics is so far not committed at all. The links with the agriculture industry and other industrial sectors are tight and prevent a rethinking in terms of nutrition, agriculture, and food production. In many political areas, we have to speak of a total failure if we take the environmental impact into consideration. The common European agriculture policy, which is currently supposed to be reformed, endangers the future of the environment and of humanity as such. Instead of presenting a real reform of the CAP, a consistent change in agriculture and food production, everything stays as it is. The EU continues to spend 40% of its budget, which is around 55 billion euros, to subsidize a deeply hostile agriculture. So we can state Europe's policies, farmers and citizens are directly or indirectly responsible for many, many crises, following the dream of steady prosperity and the greed for the daily meat, milk, and cheese on the plate. As far as veganism is concerned, of course, there has been a very rapid increase of vegans in the last 2 or 3 decades. It went much faster compared to other major social changes, but it's still not fast enough, because we do not have enough time to stop doomsday. The German philosopher Weizsäcker once said that humanity can only learn from catastrophes. The disasters are coming, that's for sure. And maybe then we will start to rethinking. But I'm afraid it's probably too late. Fact is that the European Union needs to change its food production in order to achieve the United Nations 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. But nothing happens. So we will not reach the SDGs in 2030. Here in the House we speak about it, but we not will reach them. Today Our European agriculture model is a profoundly capitalistic, short-sighted system of exploitation that has neither consumer health nor sustainability in mind. It's all about maximizing profits and dominating the global markets, benefiting only the few. However, talking about the consequences of our greed for animal products is a real political taboo here in this parliament. Only a few politicians have the courage and demand to set limits to the agricultural industry. But we are not enough. From the 751 MEPs, only a few which have the courage. We definitely will not be able to meet a global warming limit of 2 degrees by 2050. No, we'll not make this. Maybe it will be 3 or even 3.5 degrees. 3 months after the Paris Agreement, a conference was held here in the House with the chief advisor for climate of the former US President Barack Obama. The topic of this conference was the effects of global warming of 2, 4, or 6 degrees. Can you imagine? We speak with the chief advisor from Obama about 4 or 6 degree warming. What an increase in temperature of more than 2 degrees would mean for the planet, for the natural habitats, for the biodiversity, and our civilization should be clear. Doomsday. The sea level will rise and large tracts of land where millions of people live today will disappear to the sea. The sea has been cleared, overfished, and turned into a single plastic dump. Until then, the last rainforests have disappeared for palm oil and animal feed. The few groundwater that remains will be totally contaminated with nitrate, and the soil will be drained, so they hardly bring any harvest. The FAO predicts that humanity will only be able to harvest 80 more times until the soil is so drained that nothing grows anymore. 80 harvest, this means 80 years from now. In 1 year, more than 1.5 billion animals are killed in the European Union, excluding fish. That means at least 2,900 animals per minute are slaughtered. So since I start my speech, more than 35,000 animals were killed. Meanwhile, a few hundred people died of hunger. It is really hard to believe that this is happening. Dear friends, we need a revolution in the minds and hearts of the people as soon as possible. And maybe we need a revolution on the streets and squares to correct the mistakes. We need this revolution now, not in 50 or 100 years. We need it now. And I'm begging you, standing up and protect this planet, protect the animals, protect yourself. not let them ruin your home. Fight for it. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Stefanek. Next, we have MEP Eleonora Evi. Eleonora Evi ran on the ticket of the Five-Star Movement in Italy. She's part of Europe of Freedom and Democracy in the European Parliament. On her website, she declares that through her studies of design, she has a unique perspective on politics. If I understood correctly, combining the study of design and a passion for politics for her means to offer a new solution to people's needs. She calls for radical change and points out the need to rethink major issues of today's world, aiming at the improvement of the quality of life and the environment. She's also a great advocate for animals. Now I would like to invite Eleonora Evi to share her thoughts.
Thank you very much for also this very nice introduction. I ask you to put on your headphones because I'll give my speech in Italian, if you don't mind. So, grazie.
Thank you very much for coming. And thank you very much to Philip Wallen for coming as well and for the speech that he made. It's a huge honor for me to be here today and to have contributed to organizing this conference, because I think the subject that we're talking about today are fundamental issues for us, and ones which Europe today and the whole planet should be addressing. Unfortunately, they are often neglected and end up at the bottom of the list of things to do, especially if you look at what's on the European Union's agenda. The reason I say this is that I want to share with you my experience over the last 4 years as a member of the European Parliament. I've seen all kinds of things in the time that I've been here. I've seen the European Union continue to authorize the use or the growing of GM, despite the negative views expressed by the European Parliament, which occasionally does take more ambitious stances and asks for non-authorization of for the market and for the cultivation of GMs. However, the European Commission continues to authorize these in a process which I don't think can be classified as genuinely democratic. And the reason I mention this is that it's happened on more than one occasion that in the Environment Committee, amongst the MEPs that sit on the committee, we have debated the possibility of banning the placing on the market of GM crops and the growing of them as well. And people say, well, how are we going to feed animals which we are rearing? How are we going to sustain animal breeding in the European Union? It would be impossible if we end up having to import GM soya and corn and other kinds of feed because the European Union is not self-sufficient in feed production. But people didn't even think, these other MEPs didn't even think for a minute that we need to put a stop to this infernal machine and the way it produces food. We need to bring down the production of this kind of food and change the way that the agro industry actually works in Europe and in this part of the planet, the so-called Western part of the planet, where people have a relatively high standard of living. The reason I mention this is to explain to you how complex this issue is and how necessary it is, I feel, to provide more and more information. That's what we need. Because even where we have the information, and we've heard from many people. Today we've heard from Philip Wollen and from Stefan Eck, for example, and I thank them for the specific data which they have provided us with today. But we also have scientific data as well, which show how harmful the consumption of meat is for our health. And even so, people are still brushing it under the carpet. People are still pretending that it's not a problem. And we're still seeing free trade agreements being pushed through. Here, the CETA would be an example. Hopefully, we're moving towards the end of that. And with the new government in Italy, I hope that will hasten the demise of the CETA. And the European Union, though, is continuing to push through with these free trade agreements, which I think put trade at the very heart of what we want to do and forget things about protecting the environment and protecting health and protecting the health of animals. I am fully convinced that we need to take steps and that steps can be taken. And I think that the time has come now for us to act. More and more people are aware of these issues. There's a greater amount of interest on the part of our citizens, on the part of the political spheres. And I think that more people are aware that we can use participatory tools which get the opinions of these citizens across to our politicians in the institutions, local level, regional level, national level, and European level. And the reason I want to talk about this is that in the European Parliament we have a thing called the Petitions Committee, and you might not really know what this is, particularly if you come from Italy, because we don't really have anything similar there. What the Petitions Committee does is give a citizen the possibility to speak out about the infringement of European rules or laws, or say where Europe is not doing enough. They can take their issue to the Petitions Committee and have it aired there. They could say, for example, that the European Union needs new rules to improve the society that we live in a particular area. This is something that we should think about doing, because the way that citizens express their democratic views is of key importance. With that in mind, I would call on all of those present, the participants, the associations, those representing different organizations, to use these kinds of instruments to speak out in Europe, because we really need that. The European Parliament to date has been extremely conservative on future policies, CAP reform, commitment to GHG reductions, protecting the environment. We simply haven't gone far enough. We have to step this up and increase our ambitions. And hopefully, thanks to the greater participation from the European Union citizens, we can change that and make the European Parliament something which can turn these requests from our citizens into reality. Thank you very much for coming, and I hope that we can now exchange views and hear about what we all are interested in. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that nice speech. The next speaker is Indrek Tarand. Indrek Tarand joined the European Greens after running as an independent for European Parliament in Estonia. He became a politician out of a sense of obligation. For him, mainly focusing on fiscal stability, labor relations, or the free market are outdated. Instead, Indrek Tarand calls it the green imperative to try to save the planet and its biodiversity. Accordingly, he's truly engaged in working towards a better future. Now, I would like to give the floor to Indrek Tarand.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank Stefan for taking this initiative. I mean, Mr. Wallen's convincing speech reminds me that it can be compared only with a feeling I had, I think 6 years ago when Lester Brown was here from the United States, and he made his argument in a similar convincing way. Well, let me make a full disclosure first. I'm probably the only one here in the meeting room who eats meat. Occasionally, not always, but I do. I'm a predator, as every politician is. I'm a political animal, so I need to survive. And I mean, indeed, yeah, we have 600 million, you said. It's a huge nation of vegans, but still it's a minority. The predators are in majority. And you cannot, I mean, this parliament, as you mentioned, is very conservative in agricultural policies. Out of 150 billion, we spend about a third of it to the support of farming, food industries, and related activities. And do you think it can be changed just like that? No, it can't. Because, as you, Stefan, mentioned, we want to get re-elected. Actually, I don't want, so I join your I can join you, but basically, it is very difficult to get this mental change to be a dominant view. You mentioned 80, you calculated 80 harvests more? So why should I care? I would be 150 then. I mean, I mean, that's not my problem. Do I have a responsibility for my kids? Oh, yes. In that way, I might think that your approach is good. But without any skepticism, I would say that probably the things you have started and you have been dealing with, they are right things and will, in the end, bring us some very good results. But just before Mr. Wallen is going to ask questions from us, I will ask a question from him as well. That, it is very interesting to follow your argument that each killing is a murder, but murder is a sort of Homo sapiens notion. It's a legal thing. And can I accuse a tiger or a wolf, or from Darwinian perspective, when they happen to eat a lamb? Is it a murder or is it a not? And how can we address that part of nature, which is operating somewhat differently, even though we violate their rights as well all the time? So thank you very much again for coming here and being with us. It was a great day.
I just realized when I was talking, I didn't have my light on. Did anyone hear anything I said?
They did, because I switched it on.
Oh, you did. Thank you. It's a question that's often asked. Why should we do anything different? I mean, tigers go out and kill a deer. Well, the tiger doesn't have any choice. We do. We are a civilization. We have a choice. We can make a decision that is important and significant, not just for us, for all stakeholders. And who are the stakeholders in this equation? It's not just everyone in this room or future generations. It's actually a whole range of, it's an existential threat to our survival. And I'm saying you might not like it, you might find it very difficult, but sometimes when there isn't any choice, a time comes when you have to say, I'll put aside my taste buds and do what is right. I gave you a number. Stefan talked about 80 harvests, and yes, he's absolutely correct, 100%, that is published. But by 2048, all our fisheries will be dead. Our mutual friend Paul Watson says from Sea Shepherd, when the oceans die, we die. By 2048, all our fisheries will be dead. Now, it doesn't mean that we live till 2048 and bang, we fall off the cliff. No, it doesn't. It means that we start dying now, and by 2048, we're gone. Now, if any of the algorithms I just mentioned, the linkages, that enchanted web, if any of those algorithms are correct, and I can assure you they all are, but even if a few of them are correct, it means that no child under the age of 5 is ever going to reach retirement age. It's a mathematical impossibility, unless we do what my friend here is suggesting. As Shakespeare said, you know, we stiffen the sinews and we summons up the blood, and tomorrow we go to battle. This is an important battle that we've all got to fight. I was taken out to lunch by one of the most famous lawyers. And while we were having lunch, he ordered his meal, which was a steak, and I was having a vegan meal. And he kept asking questions. You know, why do you eat that? And he was arguing. We were having a debate over lunch. And he's a brilliant man. And I went through all the arguments about climate change and cruelty and human health and he couldn't respond. He said, okay, I accept that, and I accept that. And I thought right to the end, I got this guy. He's got nowhere to go. And then he said, but Phil, ultimately, I just love a good steak. And I had nowhere to go. And I was about to concede defeat, and I thought, no, I won't. I'll have a go on something that he won't expect. I said, of all the senses that you have, which is the least important one? Your sense of sight. What if you lost that? You won't be able to be in court fighting cases. You can't read. What about your sense of hearing? You will never be able to hear Mozart or the laughter of your children. Your sense of smell. Would you be willing to sacrifice that? You'll never be able to smell a rose or your wife's perfume. The sense of touch. You will never be able to feel the kiss of your grandchild when she kisses you on the cheek. Or your sense of taste. Which is the least important one? Which one will you sacrifice for something very important? And he didn't say anything for a long time. And finally he said, I've got some serious thinking to do. Because I was talking about being deaf and blind. And his face changed. He looked sad and he looked old suddenly. And we finished our lunch and I didn't see him for a long time. But a few months later, I discovered that his beloved daughter was deaf and blind. It hit him in the stomach. Now, we have to ask ourselves, when people try to defend themselves and say, we're not going to change, the next generation will change, I ask, what is the least valuable sense you're willing to give up for the very survival of civilization, or the abject cruelty that we inflict on 2 billion animals every week? Which is the least important one? Your sense of taste? Let me assure you, once you go vegan, your whole world, it rearranges the furniture of your mind. Your taste buds become better. You sleep better. You think better. I now shave in the morning with a clear conscience when I look in the mirror, because I know nobody died as a consequence of my choices. Life gets better, not worse. And I encourage you to try it. And I promise you, you'll never look back and you'll never be happier. So give it a try.
Very
How do you pronounce her name?
Thank you very much for that answer. I want to say that unfortunately Jeppe Kofod from the Social Democrats could not make it today because he had some unforeseeable commitments. He might join us later, it's not sure yet. And next we're going to come to, from the MEPs to the Eurogroup for Animals. And I would like to invite her to the podium. Okay, let's clap already for her. So Elena Dahlon is a veterinarian and a passionate animal welfare advocate. She works as a program leader for farm animals at the Eurogroup for Animals, the pan-European animal advocacy organization representing 60 member organizations in the EU and beyond. So, welcome.
Thank you. I don't see my presentation here on the screen, so... Oh, yeah, sorry, yeah. Thank you for inviting us here, first of all. I have to say I'm a bit humbled because speaking after Philip is not easy, and also after our passionate members of the European Parliament, but I will do my best, and also to keep it short and sweet. The organization I represent, Eurogroup for Animals, is in the business of improving the lives of animals that are used for human purposes, as many animals as possible, as fast as possible. And we do this through our members. We have 60 members organizations in Europe and beyond, and I'm very pleased to see that some of them are in this room today. So we operate in this political environment together in partnership and in alliance with the European Parliament. Our vision is to build a Europe that cares for animals, and we do this by representing civil society, by campaigning to drive change, try to raise awareness on important topics for animal welfare, and ultimately also by exchanging best practices and knowledge via our network of experts within our membership. We have a proven track record. We have developed it throughout the years of achievements for animals, legislative achievements, lately primarily non-legislative achievements, regrettably. But if we look at the outcomes and the results in terms of improvements, concrete improvements for the animals, if we look at the animals as individuals, we can still see that there's an enormous amount of suffering in Europe still, in spite of all the legislation. These are some, sorry for the hard pictures, but this is the reality we are being faced with still in Europe today. This is live animal transport. We look at how pigs are reared. It's not better. And we selected animals in such a way that the sheer fact of being alive and growing leads to pain. So how to place this into the predominant discourse? I really liked what was said, that the law is humanity's attempt at decency. And well, if we look at the amount of legislation and improvements we've obtained in the past few years, this speaks volume to the decency we are living in these times. And the predominant discourse is still one of growth, and growth in terms of increasing intensification globally. As you can see, there are two competing discourses: the discourse that we've heard today, and the reality in which we are operating in Europe. You're anticipating my so. Europe is very protective of its livestock industry. When I heard that eating a steak is a crime, I immediately thought, oh no, it's a way of increasing our GDP. That's the kind of comments we would hear. We are not there yet with our discourse of extending the circle of compassion and finding a different paradigm for human prosperity. I think this will be our challenge and of opportunity to avoid banging our head against the wall, because if you look at the reality now, This is sometimes how we feel. However, we have to find a way as animal welfare advocates, we represent animal welfare advocates, we represent civil society here with the European institutions. We have to find a way to walk around this wall and start building, be braver, be more inventive, and start building this, our discourse for a different paradigm of human prosperity, because clearly the path we are on now is non-viable in the medium long term. So this is just my two pennies to contribute to this discussion and say that I also see a role, we see a role for animal welfare advocacy organizations to participate in this new paradigm for a better future. Thanks a lot, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much. And now, before we go to the discussion, I would like to invite you to have coffee and some refreshments, so we all have like the brains open for later.
Please, just a moment. Please, just a moment. Just a moment. We have not only coffee, because what we heard from Phil and from Eleonora, from Elena, and what I said, I mean, it's well. In Germany, we say harter Tabak, no? Strong tobacco. Very strong tobacco, because to speak about doomsday, if nothing is changed, is hard. Therefore, I thought that we have coffee, but also some alcohol to make it easier for us. Okay.
Go vegan.
I have forgotten to say something. 15 minutes. We start again in 15 minutes. So, drink quick.
Okay, right. Oder? Ich glaube, die Techniker haben es jetzt aufgeschrieben. Go vegan.
Hello, it would be nice if everybody goes back to their seats, like we want to continue soon. Are you listening?
So, okay, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, we continue. Please, we continue. Could you go to your places?
Ich habe schon zusammengerufen. Du hast noch gefehlt, da wollte ich nicht nochmal.
After the meeting, would like 6 or 6:30 be okay? 6:30 or 5?
Down in the members' bar.
In the members' bar.
Not in the members' bar, in the members' restaurant. You can come to the time to interview and everything.
Perfect. Thanks.
Okay, again, please, everybody who is now not sitting, please take your seats.
every day.
We continue.
Let's go.
I love microphones. I just love to hear myself talk over microphones. We love to hear ourselves talk über microphones.
Geht.
Einfach geil.
Oh, das war an.
Okay, now we're coming actually to the most exciting part. I'm going to start by explaining the rules, and I hope you're all going to follow. I have a hammer, in case you don't follow. So, this is the interactive part of our conference. You, the audience, now has a chance to ask questions, raise concerns, or just express your position on today's topics. The rules are simple. You have up to 2 minutes for your contribution. I will use this hammer to signal if time is up, and we can actually also silence you with a button here. Depending on if you directed a question to a specific speaker or not, that speaker or any speaker will have the chance to respond. And we just amended the whole thing. Also, Philip Bowen will have the chance to ask you something back. So since the MEPs are used to strict time limits, they will only get 3 minutes to answer, while Philip Bowen would get greater leniency, obviously. For the matters of fairness, please try to stick to the time constraints by yourself. Don't make me use the hammer. So yeah, that are the rules. Who would like to ask a question? Nobody wants? Ah, okay.
Yes, I have a question, and for Philip Wollen for special. And you was former president of Citibank as part of capitalism, so to speak. And do you think that, for example, the clean meat industry, which is founded with millions of dollars from very rich investors, can make the suffering of animals an end? Or, also, so to speak, that capitalism, which has brought the monstrous animal suffering, can also end it. Do you believe it, or do you think that capitalism cannot end the suffering? Thank you.
It's always unwise to put labels on something because it brings a lot of baggage with it. Capitalism is responsible for a lot of bad things that have happened, and I agree, 100%. The clean meat issue, I don't really care how it is funded, because my constituencies are not shareholders, debt holders, banks, proprietors. My constituencies are the powerless animals in the slaughterhouse and in the killing fields. And if clean meat, see, once again, that's a label. But laboratory-grown meat, if that's possible, it would have 2 benefits. One, the person who buys it will not be buying an animal. He'll be buying something else. And as a consequence, the meat industry would have lost a sale. You know what I mean? They've lost some income. And when they've lost income, their profit margin goes down. And then somebody else stops buying meat and buys a bit of clean meat, and their sales go down, and their gross profit margin goes down as well. And over time, what happens? They make less and less money over time. 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, the meat industry. Whereas the other guys are going to, as they go up, their sales go up, their profit margins go up as well. As a consequence of this, the animal meat company, their weighted average cost of capital will go up. And sooner or later, they go broke. And that's when I buy champagne for everybody. My ambition is to send this industry bankrupt as painlessly as possible, but as quickly as possible, and replace it with something that is profitable, intelligent, no cruelty, good for the environment, doesn't waste our precious water resources. And finally, we will learn the meaning of sustainability, because only then will we earn the right to be sustainable. Until then, we are not sustainable because we don't deserve it.
Thank you.
Okay. We are going to start in the middle and then...
I have an add-on question, so to say, to members of European Parliament. We've already seen in the past the issues with labeling of dairy products. The thing seems to come up in the United States now with things like clean meat and also plant-based meats, so that you cannot use terms from dairy or meat to sell the products. Seems to be a pushback from the animal agriculture industry. Are there any plans from within the European Parliament to address these issues?
Well, actually, as I know what is happening, and I know what is happening, especially is happening not at European level, but more at national level so far. And where any different member states is starting to basically stop the not having the proper use of the labeling and use the common names and words that we have used so far. So pushing and introducing such bans. I pretty much agree that there should be something made at European level in order to contrast and to oppose on, or at least to try to be as soon as possible transparent. This is the first thing. There's one of the historical issues that still is on the table, which is the made-in kind of proposal, where transparency of the labeling is something still not achieved at the European level, and on which we should fight again and more in order to have the entire supply chain very clearly and approached in a very transparent way. So far there are not any specific actions taken on that issue, but I am sure that there will be this Parliament, and we as an MEP will take care of that in order to not to as another battle, as another fight to do here in the European Parliament. But I am aware of the fact, and I fully support the fact that there shouldn't be any kind of discrimination of products. And we as a supporter of a vegan and vegetarian kind of diet, we should have access to the market of those products that are suitable for vegans and vegetarians, and not being discriminated or pushed back by the industry and the old kind of industry.
I'd like to say, on the national level, we see already legislation which going in this direction. For example, in Germany, it's now forbidden to say soya milk and soya schnitzel and. And Germany is a power factor in the EU. I would put my right hand in the fire if we not will see very soon. So far there are rumors in this house that we have it also on the European level, that the meat and milk industry try to ban the use of meat and milk for vegan or vegetarian products. And unfortunately, believe me, even when you are very optimistic, we will lose this fight, because the majority, SND, the Social Democrats and the Conservatives and the Liberals, they will vote in favor for such a legislation.
Still, thank you.
Okay, so now we had two men. I'm going to take a lady next.
Yeah. Oh, hello everybody. I'm Mons Annelies. I'm a general practitioner. I'm vegan for 3 years now, and I educated myself on plant-based nutrition. And I followed the course of Colin Campbell of the Cornell University in New York online. And I started my self-education with an article of Professor Clarisse from the VUB here in Brussels. And what I learned was that we physicians, we are educated to puppets of the pharmaceutical industry. We don't know how to prevent diseases, although it's very clear that a whole food, plant-based diet, which is on legumes, fruit, vegetables, nuts and seeds with maximum 10% of unsaturated healthy fats, can even cure diseases as cardiovascular disease, diabetes, hypertension, renal failure, even cancers can be reduced in progression with only changing your food. So what we are doing now, we try to save the calf when it's drowned, already drowned, instead of preventing its drowning. So education of physicians and doctors at the university is for me very, it's necessary just to change the eating habits of the public. It will do much more than changing agriculture. People have to know how they themselves are responsible for their health, instead of that we physicians has to take care of them and we don't care. We don't heal them with all that medication because it's always more and more. And the metabolics of the medication, they come in the urine and they come into the sea and they are in the fish and they come on all our plates. So there's a lot of work to do, especially in educating physicians and doctors. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your position. Is that okay?
Hi. So to come back to the you hear me? Okay. To come back to the first question, capitalism can do something. We run an impact investment fund that only invests in non-meat proteins. And not to be misunderstood, I firmly believe that meat consumption is a no-go. It's obvious that it's not sustainable. But to honor the title of this conference, let's go beyond this issue. Is it enough? Isn't the real issue on water scarcity and people starving, ever-growing population in combination with global warming? How do you see the future of growing world population to be fed with, for example, rice crops plateauing in Asia, corn crop at maximum yields in the United States, growing deserts, ground erosion due to irrigated agriculture for vegetables, and global warming in general?
Many of the maladies you so correctly describe are problems caused by the meat and dairy industry in the first place. We have dwindling amount of arable land available as a consequence of clearing the Amazon, for example, to grow soy. And what are we doing? We're using it to feed animals. Most of the protein that the animal consumes is wasted. I think we should just cut out the middleman and go direct to the plants themselves. And when I heard that you had set up this new fund, I wanted to buy some more champagne. I think there ought to be more of it, and there will be. I understand now that there's a new index that's been set up, probably in the UK, but I'm not sure, for ethical investment, which eliminates from their list vivisectors, for example, the meat and dairy industry, the arms manufacturers. So I think you're really onto something. I don't know how big the market is, and I don't know how quickly it's going to grow. But I do know that one day it's going to be massive. And I can't wait for that day to dawn. So I wish you great fortune.
Okay, I'm in the. Oh, you want to add? Do you want to say something more? Okay, then we take this question. You have alle die Mikros an.
You said something growing world population, because this is a crisis. This is a crisis too. But to speak about the growing world population, this is a very hot item. Because it means if you said, okay, maybe this planet is good enough for 10 billion, maybe 12 billion, but somewhere there must be an end. And now, when we speak about the growing world population, that we do something against it, this means a legislation that, for example, a family has only one child, you know, same the one-child policy in China. And this hot item, how we can get something on the way to at least to stable the world population. Because as more persons are there, as more suffering will occur.
I'm sorry, just to add one sentence to that, if I may. There's only one solution to this problem, but bigger demands for our food resources and growing population, and that is the empowerment of women. If you give women the right to monitor their own breeding capacities, everything improves. It just does. A rising tide floats all boats. And if you throw in a bit of credit and allow some micro businesses to start, it just happens. There is no country that has tried giving women the right to control their own birth rates that has gone backwards. Every single one of them has prospered. And I think that's one of those things that we've got to address very, very swiftly.
Okay, now I'm going to in the middle, yeah.
Thank you. I would have two questions to Philip Wallon. First, was there a specific cause or an event that made you stop eating meat at a certain point in your life? Maybe for the MEPs as well. It's a question for them as well. And the second question is, what is your idea about a transition system? How would you conceive that? Because I know you want to stop it as quick as possible, of course, but it may be very difficult to switch from one day to another. So, because maybe, as you know, a lot of domestic animals races are very dependent from human beings. Some of them wouldn't even live alone in nature. I might think about the cow Blanc Bleu Belge here. It won't be possible because they need a cesarean to have a calf, so they would die. So how would you conceive this? And also about the landscape management without cattle raising and fertility for vegetable productions and so on without manure. How would you think about all this? Did you think about it?
You said you had 2 questions and you've just asked me 6. So if I may, I'll answer the 2 important ones. How did I change? I was an investment banker, a young man, very ambitious. And we won the mandate to do a big corporate finance job, and I was in charge of it. And my client had many businesses in many industries, very wealthy. I went as his advisor to look at all his operations, and one particular business he owned turned out to be a slaughterhouse. At the time, I was a meat eater. And what I saw that day completely terrified me. It shook me to the core of my being, and I became a vegetarian. But I didn't know much. I didn't know anything about dairy. But I just decided I was going to be a vegetarian. I would not eat meat again. And then I was on a business trip with the bank to India. And I was on the street one day, and I saw a dairyman with his cow. The cow had been hit by a lorry and had broken her spine. and he was dragging the cow to the slaughterhouse to have her killed, to sell for meat. But she was so badly injured and she was in so much pain, she couldn't walk properly. And he was throwing chili powder into her eyes and shoving sharp objects up her anus. And he dragged her to the slaughterhouse gates. And beside her, walking, was her starving, skinny, scrawny calf. Here's the punchline. No, there are many punchlines, but here's one of them. When he got to the gate, and before he handed over the rope to the butcher, the bastard milked her to get the last bit of value out of the cow before she was killed. Now, if that doesn't change the heart of a man, nothing will. It changed my heart. I went back home to Australia and I studied the dairy industry. And let me tell you right now, milk is every bit as bad as the meat industry. In fact, milk is meat in liquid form. They're two sides of the same coin. So I decided I would not consume any dairy again. But I never became a vegan. I don't even think I knew the meaning of the word. I just realized one day, many, many months later, that's what I was. I wasn't consuming any animal products. I noticed my shoes were no longer leather. My belt was no longer leather. Even my watch band was no longer leather. I became a vegan without realizing it, which is lucky in many ways, because if I had met some of these vegans who are very aggressive and they'd attacked me at that stage, I think I would have fought back and resisted it. So I'm leading into the answer to the second part of your question. You don't have to go cold turkey, to stop immediately. Ideally, if you can, that would be great. But I always say this is a broad church. Everyone is welcome. Everyone will find their own rate at which they change. The sooner the better. And I'm not going to waste my time or my energy getting into a fight to try to figure out who is a better vegan. I'm just happy for people to say, I want to become a vegan. I'll try to do it as soon as I can. Now leave me alone. And I'm happy with that result. And insofar as what do we do with the animals that are already there? Like we do with every industry in the past, in economic history, has undergone rationalization. Mining, timber, aviation, aerospace, banking, insurance, textiles, clothing, footwear, every one of them. We used to make turboprop airplanes, now we make jets. We used to make big unicycles, now we make sports bikes. The world changes. Once we make a decision that we want to get off the meat and dairy drug, we let the market decide. And we provide incentives for an orderly transition for people in the industry to exit the industry. There will be casualties, but they're going to be far less casualties than by doing nothing, because we have to understand one important fact. Meat and dairy is a sunset industry. It has no future, and it has a very inglorious past, and it has no place in civilized society, period. So let's make the tough decisions and get on with the job.
Okay, the woman in the front.
Funziona sì. Allora.
Good afternoon. I'm from the Anti-Vivisection League, and I've been listening to all of the addresses, and it's clear that certain things that go on a daily basis can lead to people to question themselves. Clearly, veganism is linked to the environment, there are economic implications, and when I say economic implications, it's not just in relation to veganism, but also in relation to the pharmaceutical industries. which is, of course, a smaller group. So when I mentioned vegans, there are certain facts that enable us to realize that certain things are going on. What has happened in the past, or animals, let's say, that we're familiar with. We go to restaurants, we see meat, whatever, and I process that information. Or I go to a supermarket and I buy fruit and vegetables, but I find a packaged meat. And obviously, you begin to become conscious of certain things. But there are other animals hidden off in laboratories, vivisection laboratories. These animals have no name, they've just got a number. They've no identity. And in the universities and in the laboratories, they're classified as materials. And we've got to think about those animals too, because no one talks about them, because they're not seen. Vivisection takes place hidden away in laboratories. So let's, well, I of course want to welcome this meeting. I want to thank the speakers, but let's try to think more and become conscious, yes, of the environment, but also bear in mind vivisectionism, because our health, the health of the animals, depends on us becoming conscious of what's going on, and we must become conscious of this now. Thank you.
I would, excuse me, this would probably make no sense to you in the translation, but I'll try. I got into a lot of trouble in Australia on the anti-viv issue because this is what I said in the newspaper. I said, vivisection is to science as pornography is to art. Did the translation work in Italian?
Yes, extremely well.
So I might need a new passport so I can come and live in Italy. Because I'm very unpopular with the big pharmaceutical companies.
Okay. Io sono
Well, I very much agree with that reflection. I want to share with you the state of the art here in Europe on this major issue. It's a very important battle that must be waged, and over the past years there's been enormous interest when, of course, Stop Vivisection was brought to the European Parliament. There were a lot of expectations, but no response from the Commission. However, it is also true that recently, I want to make this point, the European Parliament, so not the Commission, the European Parliament adopted a resolution calling for, at global level, the introduction of bans on cosmetic tests, so on animals tests, because we all know that, of course, in cosmetics, yes, these tests are banned in the EU, in theory, but they have all sorts of ways of getting around the laws, loopholes. Products tested outside the Union and then imported into the Union, or products tested because other regulations are appealed to, such as REACH. So we need to do more, and I want to tell you that the European Parliament has adopted this resolution by a big majority. It's not sufficient, needless to say. Far more needs to be done. Thank
you. Okay, then in the middle.
Thank you. My name is Jasmin. I work for Profi, which is an animal protection organization in Germany, and we try to improve well, the conditions of agriculturally used animals. I have two questions, and I hope that they haven't been discussed yet because I was absent for some time. So the first question is very quickly to you, Ms. Evi, because you mentioned the importance of petitions on the European level, and just to double check. But I mean, the border that we have to pass is to collect 1 million signatures, right? Or do you talk about a different instrument? Just, this is one question. Maybe I just add the second one. Or do you prefer to answer?
Just clarify immediately. Yeah. The petition can be submitted by each and every European citizen because it's the right of every single European citizen to file a petition to the European Parliament, so it doesn't need many, many millions of signatures. The other things is another instrument is the European Citizen Initiatives that requires 1 million, the threshold of 1 million in at least 7 different member states. So this is another instrument that invite the Commission to set and to propose the legislation. It's tricky because at the very end the Commission can also reply no. Nevertheless, it's an instrument that creates it's good for information, and it's good to have a political stance and political position and debate into the Parliament as well.
Okay, thank you. And the second question is a bit more complex. Sorry, yeah, the second question is a bit more complex, so I try to put it clearly. Because, I mean, we discussed all the different kind of crises we have. We have the refugee crisis, we have environmental crisis, we have animal suffering. And we also said that it's very much related to each other. It's, well, mostly related to our agricultural export model that we are having, I would say. And so maybe that's a question to all the politicians here in the room that really know the system here. Because what I would like to know, really, because I always like to think of how we can solve those issues and to think in solutions. So what I don't really understand is if we have DG Agri and DG Envy and DG Development and DG Trade, and all the goals, of course, I mean, they are, how can I say that? I mean, if DG Agri decides this and that, but it's obviously not very nice for the goals that DG Development has or DG Envy has. So how can we set up a system, I mean, maybe we can just think creatively, that we set kind of priorities and that we have like one very clear leader or oh, that sounds very bad now, but very, I don't know, someone that really oversees the whole system and all the problems we have, and then according to that sets priorities that maybe it's not possible to have this model in case it really harms the other goals. You know what I mean? Because I think the whole system is just wrong as it works. Yeah, thank you.
I would say that in this house, the Agriculture Committee is really, really powerful. And everything what has to do with food production, of course, they make the decision. The scandal here in this house is that almost 50% of the members of the Agriculture Committee are farmers. A clear conflict of interests. Nobody says something here. It's normal. So, and then these colleagues in the Agri Committee, they have good friends also in the Envy Committee. Envy Committee is much, much more ambitious and progressive. But when it really comes to the point, most of the time, Agri has to say. Or, as I said before, it depends on the question, is a decision in favor for the economy or not? And the decision here in the House are mostly done with the focus on the economy. Just one fact more. Last week or before last week, we have seen the Commission explained and published. Oh, now we have 3 nicotinoids. We have a ban for 3 nicotinoids to stop the dying of the bees. In the Union are 270 different types of pesticides and insecticides are legal. Now they took 3 away. These other 267 insecticides and pesticides, they are also killing the bee. Not so radical, a little bit less, but they still are very dangerous for the biodiversity. So, you see, normally they should say directly, stop, we are coming to a point where our nature is deep in danger, and the people here, because when the bees die, okay, should we going on the letters and make it same in China? And then, okay, this is greenwashing a little bit. Okay, we took 3 from the market. Forget it.
Okay, on my right.
Vor allem vielen Dank, Stefan, für die Organisation di queste treffen. Volevo soltanto ringraziare.
I just wanted to thank Mrs. Evie for the battles that she's waging here. She does that in a very professional, very competent and intelligent way. And of course, she has her eyes focused on the results. So my compliments and congratulations for what she's doing here. And now to Mr. Wallen.
I need to speak very, very quickly. Before I presented the organization I work for, I advocate actually for, which is called BROC. He astonishingly knew already my organization, which deals with a particular category of animals, that are the animals that have been abandoned through the years, basically between at the end of the First World War and between the 2 world wars, and then has become an historical problem. We are speaking about equids, horses, donkeys, and mules that are important in the economy of the developing countries, particularly in Africa. We are talking about Africa today at the end of the day. So I just wanted to have his opinion in how he sees the importance of the contribution of these working animals that instead of being abandoned are being seen as a valuable contributor to the ability of a family, ability of a rural community to make out a living. And how is important for us to underline and to pitch this new angle to defend these animals all around the world, which, if not, they will be just abandoned or slaughtered in a very dramatic way. And then I have met here today my fellow colleagues of Eurogroup for Animals. I was speaking to these brilliant people about an issue that we're going to discuss in the next few months. I want to just give you this information. There is an emerging issue concerned about the donkeys that had basically no value till yesterday, but in the Chinese traditional medicine, after the diaspora, let's say, they find out that boiling and sewing the skin of a donkey, you can produce a certain gel called enjayo, which can be used to produce some kind of traditional Chinese medicine. And we are assisting to a mass slaughter of donkeys all around the world. 6 million donkeys every year. I just wanted to raise the point and have your opinion. Thank you.
I'm aware of the work that Brooke has been doing since the middle of between the 2 wars. I have discovered in the last 20 years, whenever there's any contact between humans and animals, the animal will always suffer and will be exploited. It's a sad fact of life. And the argument is always made that these poor people, they have nothing else. They need to have an animal in order to provide them with a living. That animal has no choice, by the way. I'll come back to the equines, because that is a specific case, but we have the same problems in Southeast Asia with the buffaloes, for example. They say we want to breed the buffaloes, so they can help plow the fields, and they provide us with manure. And it's a very good synergy. The buffalo has a life with us and contributes by working for us. So it's a good relationship. But they don't ever tell you what happens to the calves, for example, or what happens to the buffalo milk. For example, in India now, India is the world's largest live animal exporter. You would never have thought of that, the largest. And many countries are now exporting, as you quite correctly say, donkeys to meet the China demand. In the case of equines, but we had the problems in Egypt with Mubarak, for example, and the cart horses that were used to taking tourists up to the pyramids. There were no tourists, so these guys just didn't feed the animals. And Brooks came along and provided money for a certain period of time, thinking that one day life would turn back to normal in Egypt. But it never really did. And then I had to come along at the end and write out a lot of big checks to NGOs in Egypt to continue feeding those animals. And the guys who ran those animals would say, we treat them like our family. We love them. Sure, they love them while they're making a living for them. But as soon as they're not making a living, they abandon them. And what happens is that there's a market for foals, for more and more breeding, because when those horses die, they need more. And this industry keeps going on and on. So I think we need to get animals not to be treated as property and not to be treated as servants, unpaid slaves. And that's why we rely so heavily on organizations like Brook to do the hard work on the ground in a very difficult environment. And Africa is a tough gig, I know. But there's no easy answer. I wish I could wave a magic wand and say, here's the solution. But I think we've got to be honest enough to say whenever there's a human-animal conflict, the problem is always caused by the human, and the animal always loses. And that's a very gloomy note to end it on, but it's a truthful one.
Stefan Eck also has a question. I guess I'll let him go first, if that's okay.
I have now a question. You said India is the biggest live animal exporter. India is the biggest live animal exporter. That's new for me. Can you tell me in which countries India export living live animals?
To the Middle East, to Bangladesh, largely buffaloes. And underground, I think India has some very powerful laws, but they're not enforced about transporting animals. Very tough laws. But the animals are shipped across the border to Bangladesh and to the Middle East. And that's a very, very big market. And it's largely buffalo meat.
Thank you.
Okay, I overlooked this gentleman in the back earlier.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. This is a question for the three of you. In your personal and honest opinion, what do you think that it takes for politicians, to start taking seriously the advocacy of vegan values based on scientific arguments on environment and health issues, and moral arguments on hunger? Thank you.
All three. Okay. Maybe you start.
Yeah, you get. I'm just here for comic relief. There was a premier in Australia, and he said the fundamental purpose of any political party is to get elected. Anything else is just window dressing. Ultimately, politicians really don't care, with some exceptions, of course, people in this room. But by and large, they don't really care as long as they get re-elected. And that is a sad fact of life. What would make them to change? I would say a personal experience, a personal epiphany, or a massive zoonotic disease to shake us out of our complacency. I don't know if it was Goethe who said that mankind is motivated not by reason, but by ritual. And we follow this ritual of meat, dairy, eggs, fish, all this nonsense, because that's what our parents taught us, that's what their parents taught them. So it's time to break the cycle. And some people come to the realization on health reasons, others on ethical reasons. It doesn't really matter as long as they get there, and get there as soon as possible. But I don't know how we get through to the I hate calling them our political masters because they're not. They are political servants. And we can fire them just as easily as we hired them. But we, people in this room, need to become much more politicized ourselves and have a vote bank that we can deliver at every election to let them know that we are serious and we are not going away and we're only going to be growing in future, not getting smaller.
How high, you think all, is the value of a human life for politicians? Very high, middle high, or? It's very easy. We have to look into the history a little bit. But even in the history, last month, last year, the value of human lives for politicians, 0. We had the First World War, the Second World War. All our history was full of killings. People kill each other. Now, a very new example. Brussels is, at the moment, working to build up Fortress Europe. Because they not want that starving people, refugees, poor people coming inside Europe. What they do, they let them die in the sea. And even they do now everything. They want to spend money for Frontex, more money. They do everything that the walls are higher, knowing that these people are dying, and they do nothing. Forget it to count on the politicians when we speak about values of human life and values of animal life. There we can see it's so difficult. If they not take care of humans, why they should take care of animals? As same what Phil said, the only focus is be re-elected, because you make a hell of a lot of money if you are here in this house or in the parliament in Berlin or in Rome or somewhere else. We should chase them all away.
I want to add something, because I have been elected in a movement which is called the 5-Star Movement, that has as a rule the possibility to be elected only twice. Then you go back to your life, to what you did, what you were doing before, and no more political life for you. So this is the rule that we are following, and I really and truly believe in this, because in this way, this is the only way where a politician can really work for the public good and the public interest, and not, of course, their own private interest. And I strongly believe in that.
I'm gonna start the clock again so everybody gets to actually ask something. I'm gonna start with the one in the back.
Sì, allora anche io avrei.
I've also got a question for all three of you. I think that everybody here wants to live in a more ethical world. Many of us are activists in lots of associations which debate animal welfare, and having spent a day campaigning, speaking with people, being out in the streets, sometimes I wonder how we can get people to stop eating meat and animal derivatives when, well, they still go to bullfights, they still go to the zoo, they still hunt. I wonder if in the European Union, at European level, it might be possible to have laws for all European countries which would ban the exploitation of animals, but not I'm not talking about for food purposes. The idea is to try and get across to people how much animals are sentient beings. So banning the bullfight, sports where animals are used, hunting and so on, vivisection. These are situations in which animals are exploited not for food but for other reasons, and perhaps by banning those things then people would understand that animals are sentient beings, and then they would come round to not eating meat almost automatically, because they would stop going to zoos, so they would stop hunting and so on, and that might have a knock-on effect on their consumption of meat. So would it be possible to ban these things at European level?
Allora, l'articolo...
Well, Article 13 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union says that animals are sentient beings and does provide for protection for them. But we all know that to date that article hasn't really been properly implemented, and the reason for that is something which we mentioned earlier. What often prevails is the logic of exploitation and profit, not just when it comes to farming, but also in other areas as well. Bringing in other measures to protect animals, from my point of view, would be the right thing to do, but it's very difficult to actually implement properly. If you take hunting, for example, and the European directives such as the Habitats Directive and the Birds Directives, these protect a series of species on the basis of European rules. Now, despite that fact, there are exemptions, derogations. Which exempt people from respecting some of these rules in certain cases. Now, when talking about this, it's not just about European laws, it's also about national laws and about the division of competences or remits between Europe and the member states. So bringing in bans or measures of the kind that you hope for would be complex and difficult. Of course, raising awareness and campaigning is very useful when it comes to developing policy. Perhaps I could just touch on some of the points which were mentioned earlier. I wanted to bring up an example of how politics can make steps forward, but these are small steps, they're gradual steps. And the voice of citizens and the pressure that they can bring to bear in particular contexts has to be kept up. I'll give you one example. Recently, we voted on a resolution on the future of agriculture in Europe. So this is on food and agriculture. Now, after 4 years of working on these issues, we were able, in the final text of the resolution, to insert something which seems very much a commonplace. Considering that the consumption of meat and saturated fats and red meat in the European Union is higher than the recommended levels, and that the food industry continues to contribute to GHG emissions and nitrogen emissions, So for the first time, we've managed to include in the resolution something that the WHO has been saying for some time, something that the scientists have been saying for some time. But this is finally in one of the European Union's texts. So this has taken us 4 years, and it's a relatively small step forward. And it's not even binding because it's a resolution. But it is an improvement. So I wanted to give you a specific example of how persevering can lead to improvements, albeit gradual ones. Many of the changes which we have to bring about, of course, depend on each and every one of us.
In the middle?
Can you hear me? I'm Kristen. Hey, thank you. Thanks for having us, first of all, and thank you for all the great speeches. And I'm really happy to be here. Can you hear me right? I want to bring up a topic that might seem a little strange, maybe at first. I would like to ask your opinions or your thoughts on animal communication, as we're talking quite widely a lot about seeing animals as individuals with individual feelings, being sentient and everything. I recently experienced animal communication in action, and it was really, really powerful. And we got information from the animal that we couldn't have gotten from anyone in a room, that only the animal could have known. So there was the owner of that animal that later confirmed that information. So that I know might seem a little bit like a spiritual hippie thing to do or say, but I think it's quite underrated and overlooked, as we're always saying, like, animals cannot speak for themselves. When I actually experienced that they can, and I attended animal communication, I conducted animal communication, and I'm quite impressed by what it can do. And I wonder why, I was gonna ask, sorry, I'm a bit moved, I'm a bit nervous. So I was wondering if legislation could actually be, like, if animal communication could be a means to change legislation from animals being objects to subjects. So, and that is, I know it's a strange question, and I know there's lots of stigma about it not being taken seriously and laughing at it. And I know about that, but I was also so impressed, and it really changed my mindset and the way I saw animals, because I'm already vegan, I already have respect for all living beings. But after having experienced animal communication, it took me to a new level of respecting them and seeing their needs. And also, like, in cases of abuse, could it be, in your jurisdiction, could it be a means to help them to raise their own voices? What do you think?
Think about it. People can speak. They have a voice. But we have seen the war in Vietnam, the war in Iraq, First World War, Second World War, the war in Croatia and in the Kosovo. The ability to speak and to have a voice not means directly that then the politicians react, number one. Number two, it's a very touchy item. We have it difficult enough to tell our enemies, call them enemies, that they ruin the earth and that they should stop meat, and for this reason. So for real scientific reasons, we can prove it, that we have climate change and. And I see it very dangerous if I am coming, for example, to my colleague and said, okay, I have here a dog and animal communicator, and the dog said, hey, you have to take care of my rights, and if you don't, then I complain. You know, it is dangerous to coming with such ideas, because then they're coming directly and say, it's true, Stefan is some funny man here, and we can forget him. Dangerous.
Okay, in that case, I take the next question. I promise the lady in the back in the pink.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, everyone. I would like just to take this opportunity to share some of my perspectives about the solutions for all the above mentioned problems as you listed in this paper. And also, I would like to know what's, the thought or the suggestions from Mr. Wallen and from Mr. Eck, and also anyone in the panel, because I don't know the name of the others. But for me, I think you mentioned all those kind of questions, and I think all those kind of social problems and crises in the world, which we can notice and which we can see. I think the key issue is just the deterioration of the morality and also the human's heart. If we don't try to solve the key issue, if we just remain in the phenomena, I think, to be honest and direct, we'll waste our energies. And now what we can do is, how can we make the joint effort of the worldwide and also even from the European level, how to try to go back our traditional moralities and try to assimilate the universal common, values. If I make that simple as 3 words, the most important word for me is truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance. If we try to help the world to recognize this is the key issue, if we can make the joint effort to try to help the world to realize the key issue of how to improve our human's heart and how to solve this kind of deterioration of morality, I think will make the things easy and will make the world to be peaceful and to be happy to live, and even for animals, for all those who are suffering from hunger crisis and all those kind of social problems, that will make things easy. I just hope anyone in this room, everyone, I think, we have the responsibility to try to find a solution and try to make the effort to see how we can even maybe start from ourselves to try to improve the morality and try to go back to the tradition and how to assimilate the 3 words of truthfulness and compassion and tolerance. Thank you. Thank you.
I think it was a comment, not a question. I saw the lady in the... Yeah, I saw you doing it earlier.
Grazie. Thank you. It's a question to all 3, and just allow me an introduction. I've been involved in health for 30 years. In fact, I am co-founder of a community. There are 60 of us, 30 children who don't have allergies, who have been fed as vegans. Well, we recently set up, in fact, a canteen. But in addition to studies like done by Seventh-day Adventists, I mean, there are all sorts of studies on food. I think we need a collection of data, of global data, that we could have access to, all of us, because the real strength, and I fully agree that if, we don't want to make people resist us, we want to sow good seeds. So to give value to these good seeds, we have to show them and not just allow all of this data to be in the hands of academic institutes. We need to create a database base that helps us to understand how things relate better. We have 30 children who play together. Yes, they do. They do quarrel sometimes, but they behave differently from other children. So would it be possible to have a collection of data that we could all accede to, so that we would have a general database on health questions? Thank you.
I don't know if a single database would be adequate to cover the vast universe of information out there. There is a database out there already. It's called the Internet, and that's what's made our lives so much easier. Nowadays, there's no excuse for ignorance. As long as you can type and you can read, you can be educated. I do understand what you're talking about, because we should have the ability to share our knowledge and our information as widely as possible. But you're focusing largely on the health issues, and many organizations are now coming through. Veg Victoria in Australia, PCRM in the United States, PFA in India, for example. There's one in South Africa. I've forgotten the name right now. It'll come to me in a moment. They're all providing new insights into the way our diets are contributing to bad health, and conversely, how good diets can give us a much better life. But there is no centralized database. And I think if there was a centralized database, people might see that as being a risk. They might take it less seriously. They'd want to know who controls that database. And people may not trust it as much. But this open marketplace of ideas called the Internet is a wonderful thing. And I think we need, Facebook has been another wonderful thing for us to get the messages across. But there'll be other platforms coming in the future, I'm sure.
Okay.
Thank you. I have a question for Mr. Volan. You talk about Occam's razor, and it's a concept I really do like. But in my belief, we only applied the Occam's razor in food only when we came on Earth 200,000 years ago, when we were hungry and we got a fruit from a tree, or maybe an insect or a small animal. Then we start hunting, and then it was a little complex. Then we started agriculture, where all the problem began. Then we started farming, factory farming, genetically modified agriculture, and what so on. But all this creates problem, but at the same time, it creates wealth. And you came from an economy world, and you are completely aware how much wealth is created by all this. My question is, in a world where if I buy meat and I get cancer, I increase the GDP of my country. And if I grow my own veggie and I'm healthy, I am a problem from the GDP of my country. How can you convince people and institutions like this one that we have to invest in a vegan world, but probably will not increase the GDP of this union, but will increase the health of this union? How can we convince people and institutions, moreover, of this? Thank you.
You've probably asked one of the best questions I've heard. It's a very important one. If I had the answer, I would have done it already. I don't have the answer, but 20 years ago, people didn't even talk about veganism. Nowadays, everybody talks about it. In the supermarket near my house, 10 years ago, they didn't have a single vegan product. Now you walk down the same supermarket and you have aisles of vegan product. So we're doing something right. What is not measured is the gross national health, the GDP, but no one measures that. I gave you the number, $8 trillion through bad health in the United States. Why don't I could increase the GDP in Australia massively. I could simply start manufacturing landmines or guns and bullets. That would increase it massively. But that's the wrong metric. I think the metrics that we should be trying to find is very sort of Twilight Zone kind of stuff. But what is our human health like? What is our crime statistics? Are crime statistics going down? Are the levels of divorces going down? How many kids are graduating from college? Those are the metrics that really matter. How many people live into their 80s relatively healthy and then pass away? Those are the kinds of measures that really count. GDP is a dumb thing, a clumsy tool.
Okay, we are gonna come to an end very soon. I already promised one person in the back. There's lots of questions. Can we collect 3 questions, and the ones on the back, they will decide which ones to answer, okay? Okay.
So, hello everyone, and thank you. I'm Lily, and it's a very interesting discussion. So my question would be whether all of you believe that like real change and like human and animal liberation, a vegan world, is achievable without like a fundamental political revolution, because the system we are living in is based on maximizing profits through the exploitation of the weakest and the voiceless.
Okay, next question in the corner.
Yes, hi. My name's Anne-Marie. I work for a veggie organization here in Belgium. I was wondering what the European Parliament and the institutions can do to make a good example, because we receive a lot of pushback if we try to educate the caterers in the institutions. They don't want to implement plant-based food, or they're against vegan, or it's too difficult, and they don't even want to work with us to help improve the offering. And often you don't even get vegan food here. So is there something you can do on a level?
Well, it's not a question. It's just to remember all the people here present in this audience that this Sunday, 10th of June, there is the 4th, I think, March, for the closing down of all slaughterhouses here in Brussels. So I hope I will all see you there on Sunday, because Stefan Eck begged us to go on the streets, occupy the streets, and the movement will not change if we only stop eating meat. We really have to make this revolution something that will happen, but we have to act for this. And then another important date is on 16th of June. Peter Singer is coming to Brussels here at the VEB, and I hope you will also all come 16th June for Dear Animal. You can all visit the website. Thank you.
I try to answer on, but the last question was not a question.
No.
It was more. It was more a little bit promotion, but no, right? You should go all on the streets, on the square, on the places, on the squares, in the streets, and show that you are not satisfied with the existing system. Number one. Number two, the first question. Yes, we need a real revolution to change something. I mean, and this revolution will not. Cannot succeed when we're sitting at home on our Facebook or on our computer, and then we press the button, okay, petition to the. Forget the petition. Even the ECI has only a little bit influence here on the thinking in this house. A little bit influence, but not so much. And normal petitions, they are in the, in the garbage with them, really. Forget it. Petition, also ECI is one instrument which can at least bring the attention of the people here in the House to a subject. And then the last question, you know, when I was coming here in the House 4 years ago, and the first meeting in Strasbourg, the town mayor in Strasbourg had a present for every MEP, a bottle of wine and a big glass of foie gras. So I went directly in my political group and said, hey, this is der Fraß, ich muss das sagen, I called it Fraß, you know, this is the dirt bullshit of our class enemy, and we not can take this foie gras, you know, liver pattern. So, and I said, we give it back. So I collect the foie gras and we send it back to the town mayor and said, keep your shit. And many people in my political group, they did the same, and then the town mayor was afraid to come personally to me. He sent his representative, and I said, hey, never again. Then I wrote a letter to the president of the parliament. I said, I not will see foie gras see in the restaurants, served in the restaurants. No, they promised me in one meeting, we never will have foie gras here in this house for the MEPs. 3 months later, you see foie gras again. Useless, useless, useless.
Okay, now we're gonna go to the closing remarks. Our schedule actually doesn't really say who wants to go first. Stefan, Philip? Okay. Okay.
And maybe you can have also. So my closing remarks.